Popcorn Junkies. Welcome to a review of a very curious film. When I went to see this, Maddie texted me and said, "Oh, what are you going to see, Dad?" And I said, "Believe it or not, I'm going to see a film about the first cow to land in America and the story of two men who essentially tried to start a business by stealing milk from it."
Did you know that much?
Yeah.
Oh God, I didn't.
And when I said that, she was like, "Oh, let us know how it goes." Yeah. So this is First Cow, directed by Kelly Reichardt. She did Meek's Cut Off. She makes very sort of specific films about the sort of American hinterland during the sort of time of the settlers. This is very much part in the as part of the origin story of America, and for me, the American dream. And the film starts an extraordinarily long shot of a barge passing across a river. And it starts in the modern day. And within probably about 5 or 10 minutes, we follow the actions or the trail of an archaeologist who goes and is digging around. You don't know why, it's not explained.
I felt that was the filmmaker.
And she discovers a couple of skeletons. And then, the reason I'm saying that before we talk about anything else is that's the prologue, that's the setup, and then we go back in time.
Yeah, almost in an embrace, weren't they? Yeah. They were two together, like
two men lying in sort of almost marshland.
Yeah. Whether they were husband and wife, we didn't know what they were at that stage.
You've got no idea. It's the classic, simple narrative hook. Who are these people?
Yeah.
And then with a really nice parallel device of an old boat moving along the lake, we cut to 1820. So what did you think you were going to see when you went to see this?
I hadn't read anything about this.
Right.
Except that I know she did Meek's Cut Off, and I know Meek's Cut Off was about America.
I mean, this is a very sort of simple story. We meet the cook, called Cookie, as he's called, played by John Magaro. And he's working, essentially, I thought it was really nice about, it was almost documentarist. It's like, this is almost the absolute opposite end of the spectrum of The Revenant. Think of The Revenant, and then think of settlers, and then think of travel and frontierness and all that kind of stuff.
I thought of The Revenant, actually, as I was watching it. It's the same period, isn't it? Gold Rush and all of that.
And we've got this really quite unpleasant band of men, with their sort of, what's the Mark Twain, what's the name of the book?
Huckleberry Finn.
Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
It's very Huckleberry Finn with their sort of beaver hair and hats.
I thought it was incredibly, and I suppose it's silly to say, because of course it would be authentic, but incredibly authentic, the costumes. I mean, it looked like it would take them hours to get dressed, except I suppose nobody took their clothes off at night. And they were an unpleasant lot. I think it's important to say.
Yeah, really, men's men who, like, if you didn't like what someone said, you punch them, you spit at them, you wee on them, you just shout at them. Yeah. And Cookie, you get a real sense of fear for Cookie, because he's a cook.
And he's also a mild man, isn't he?
He's a mild man, he's a gentleman.
He's a lovely man.
He's a gentleman. And insofar as he's kind of having to feed this motley band, you realise quite quickly that, the cook is it's quite a pressurised job. Yeah. Because they haven't eaten much.
No.
And he's on the forage. He's on the forage.
On the forage. It starts with him collecting mushrooms.
Yeah.
And they're already moaning this lot because, is this all we've got to eat? We want meat to seem to be meat, they were saying. Yeah. It becomes clear as the film goes on. He's mild. And
mild-mannered in the extreme.
Exactly.
I mean, he barely says a word across the film.
No, I loved that.
Yeah. But, suffice it to say, things don't go quite right with this band. He finds himself separated, and we find ourselves in an early settlement in Oregon, America. Yeah, and when we talk early settlement, what I loved about this setup of this settlement was the fact that you really saw the kind of first steps of towns being built.
Yes.
You saw them nailing wood into the floor, and this is pre-Western.
Yes.
So forget the saloon and all that malarkey.
Yes.
There was a really well-observed authenticity, I thought, to the street, which is one street through mud, the tents and the shambolic shacks that are being constructed, and the pub. The bar, which was a remarkable place.
Yeah, I thought that was wonderful. This nice man meets up with another nice man, and
a Chinese man.
A Chinese man, except that doesn't really count.
It does, because he thinks he's an Indian, and then he says, "No,
that's
I'm
right,
Chinese."
That's true. But he's very, very he's more gentlemanly than the first gentleman.
They're both very gentlemanly.
They are. But no, the reason I'm saying that is that when he more or less says, "Do you want to come back for coffee?"
Yeah.
Not in a just in a friendship way. And then the Chinese man takes him back to his
little shack.
And it is a little shack.
Yeah. This is literally the birth of a town. It could be the birth, I don't know, it could be the birth of Portland, who knows, Oregon, for all we know. Things are sold, trinkets are sold, people are trading. He's bought a new pair of shoes or boots with the money from his Trek or wherever he's got those boots from. Did he buy them or did he knit them? I missed how he got the boots, but what you've got to understand is this is a period of time that when you walked through a town with new boots on,
you were risking
kinky boots. I mean, it was like Jesus. I mean, everyone was looking at him. I thought he was going to be killed for his boots.
Yeah, that is conveyed that feeling and that emotion, and he could have got killed for his threat. So in such small bits,
bite-sized chunks.
Bite-sized chunks, exactly. She doesn't belabour that. She doesn't belabour anything in this film.
Yeah, and she doesn't particularly shoot it in a beautiful way. I mean, what she's done really well is you're not looking at remarkable scenics here. A lot of it's very dark, it's very functional. But what I think she did such a good job of is she observed the era and the set, so that wherever you pointed the camera, you were utterly immersed. And I think the idea that you were in this kind of slightly tighter frame also meant that you were really almost, because there was a sense of claustrophobia both in the interiors, even when they were on the street, there was a sense of oppression, and I think that was helped by the aspect ratio that she chose.
Yeah.
Of course, Ewen Bremner's in there, who we all know as the guy from Trainspotting.
I was so pleased to see him. He never gets things, does he?
No, he doesn't. And so what you discover quite quickly is there's the landed boss, which is Toby Jones, who lives in this house. And he has his sort of militia who kind of basically make sure the running of the town's all right. They all go to the pub, there's all sorts of argy-bargy in the pub, classic fight situation, and he gets handed the baby, doesn't he, and all that sort of stuff to look after. And so you've got, it was really real.
Yeah.
It was really real. So I was really, you could smell it, you could smell the place.
Yeah, but yes, you could, exactly. That's how immersive it was. But even the boss, the Toby Jones character, he is the big I am in that area. But his big I am doesn't amount to much, let's face it. No. It's a bit slightly bigger house than everybody else. Yeah. And, key point here, the first cow.
So the first cow comes in from England or something.
And I loved that shot as well, because it was a repeat of the beginning one with the cow.
Comes in on a raft, doesn't it? Just across the river. It's really magical.
And the cow almost reflects the main character, because she doesn't say anything.
She doesn't say anything. She's as calm and as quiet as him, as Cookie.
Yeah, as Cookie.
And then what really happens, and this isn't a spoiler, is they...
It's unbelievable, but go on.
Yeah, effectively, they're struggling to make money, and then they effectively hit upon, or the cook hits upon this idea that if they could get some milk, he could make this really nice, essentially a donut, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of sticky, lovely cake.
And he knew that by just the addition of milk, it would make a huge difference.
It was going to transform the taste. And what they do, and this is why I think Nadia would like this film.
I think anybody would.
It's a film that pivots around food and having a sweet tooth and having a sort of taste for confection, you know. They make these beautiful cakes, and they suddenly become all the talk of the town, all the rage of the town, but right down to the point that it elicits the interest and intrigue and palate of Toby Jones and the superiors, doesn't it?
I don't know what you felt at that scene, but what you see, she does it so economically. What you see is a queue building day by day. Now, I thought that was big jeopardy. I thought somebody is going to, push their way in. And if they're looking at boots like that, they're going to take his things. But of course, because nobody could understand how it made it. It was like magic.
Yeah. And a secret recipe.
A bit later, he adds honey, and it looked delicious.
I wanted one.
Yeah,
I wanted
exactly.
one. I wanted to muscle people out of the way.
And then eventually, somebody says, "Oh, the boss wants to do it." So everybody goes like this, and he comes along the boss. And I have to say, Toby Jones, who is always a pleasure for me, it was on his best.
I thought he was perfectly cast and he pitched it perfectly. And so you're right, what happens in this film is a slowly building sense of menace with absolutely no real effort from the filmmaker other than presenting a slightly repetitious process of them milking, making, and each time they milk and make, and there were these great scenes of him milking the cow. It's very quiet.
That's very well put, because that's the rhythm of the film.
It's the rhythm of the film, milking, making, and you just begin to think, hang on a minute, this can't carry on unnoticed.
No. Exactly, and the two things that happen while Cookie is the one who milks the cow.
And
Lee is the one who
goes
up a tree to keep watch. And I kept thinking things like the one up the tree is going to fall asleep and it's going to be a disaster. Now, what's so funny, and it is funny about Cookie milking the cow, is that he develops. It sounds weird. A relationship with this cow.
A bond.
I mean, he talks to her as if he's her best friend. And he says thank you. He always says thank you. He always greets her. She looks round and she's calm. And the thing about cows is they need to be milked, otherwise they're uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And we don't know at this stage. We start to think if she's the boss's cow and she's giving all this milk every night, you must have started to think this, she can't have much milk for him.
Yeah, what are they putting in their tea?
Exactly.
Well, what I loved was the constant culinary references. So I never thought I'd see a film where where a line which carried the most dramatic weight and made me go, was when Toby Jones said, "Could you make a clafouti?"
Clafouti? Did you know what that is?
I know what a clafouti is. It's one of my favourite desserts.
I'd never heard of it.
And it's defined by a custard, essentially, of sorts, and milk is in now. And this for me is the big intriguing question that I want to ask you. What happens is, Toby Jones has a guest, gets him to make a clafouti because he's so handy at making these donuts, and suddenly, he shares this fact that his milk isn't delivering enough milk.
With the guys that come for the meal,
Yeah, the guys come for the meal. Suspicion, I'm not sure whether suspicion started to be sort of
No, I think
peaked.
at that stage, one of the most important lines in the films, don't you think, comes from Lee, who says, because Cookie
Chinese
says,
guy,
Cookie says at one point, this is, we're taking a lot of milk, this is a bit dangerous. And Lee says there are some people who will never think they'll be stolen from because it just doesn't happen.
And so it builds to this moment where their cover's blown, essentially.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask you was, I wondered did you not feel in Toby Jones, there was a very, very sort of English scene where he has this new guest, he invites the people in to make the donuts, the Cookie and Lee. He's talking about making a clafouti. They say, let's go and look at the cow.
Yeah.
Do you not feel he, at that point, already had an awareness?
No.
Do you not?
No, I mean...
Because he talked about how sometimes killing someone is a very stern way of making people know not to misbehave themselves in a society. Because he's essentially the sort of the sheriff, if you like, of this town.
I don't remember that line.
Yeah, he says, the guy on the ship who is entertaining comes in and says, we had a mutiny, I told them off, and we weren't too severe on them.
Yeah.
And Toby Jones goes, but severity sometimes is of worth, because it sends out a clear message to those who are stealing from you.
I still think at that point he hasn't got a clue.
He hasn't got a clue.
What's happening to him.
Right.
And in fact, the person who does have the clue is his guest, isn't he? As they all come out,
yes.
he says to him...
Well, because the cow suddenly goes, look, it's my mate, Cookie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've got Cookie there, and the cow almost turns around to Cookie and goes, all right, mate, how you doing? And you're thinking, don't look at Cookie.
But the thing is, Cookie this is me sitting in the cinema on my own thinking, Cookie, don't greet the cow. Are you stupid?
He may as well have milked it in front of them.
He may as well.
It's a very leisurely, very slow, very meditative. It was a truly mindful watch for me. And this came at a point where I was in the middle of a massive mental breakdown. And I took myself to the cinema. And it was possibly the most perfect antidote to where I was with my mental state.
Yeah.
It was totally escapist, utterly immersive, fascinating in its obsession, really, and how it pivoted, as I said to Nadia, around food. I thought it was very clever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is really a film about the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
And really it's a film about, and this is why I thought it was an incredibly clever, counterintuitive film about the American dream. We've seen so many films about the American dream, and it's I know a lot of people go, the American dream is so unequal. It is unequal. I felt for them because Lee, the Chinese character, kept talking about the hotel they could go to.
Yeah.
They kept talking about a sense of, let's leave this sort of area and let's start afresh in San Francisco or somewhere else.
He had bigger plans.
He had bigger plans, and I kept feeling like, so this is a film about ambition. It's about what do you do to pursue ambition. It's about high ambition versus low ambition. And I thought Cookie had low ambition, whereas Lee had high ambition. And in a weird way, if they'd followed Lee's higher ambition, they could have escaped.
But I thought it was down to Lee, really, that they became so big so quickly. I mean, he kept saying, more, really. If you can do more. He wasn't nasty about it, but if you can do more, do more.
Yeah.
And then he started to say, we're playing a dangerous game here. It might sort of
backfire,
rebound on us.
Backfire. And then we have this final sort of sequence or chapter to the film, which is essentially a hunt. It's like
because they get separated.
It's like The Revenant. This film is like The Revenant without a bear, but with a really immovable, static cow.
Yes.
This is The Revenant with a cow.
Yes, it is.
And so a hunt happens, and in a beautifully symmetrical, circular, cyclical fashion, you get to the end of the film, and without any overt drama, shooting, killing, murdering, you have a moment, which I won't ruin, the final moment, where they're in the forest, they settle down, and we go to black.
Yeah.
I thought it was a perfect ending.
There's two things I think here. If you remember when we described the film to you and how it started, it's in the present day, and there's a person finding two skeletons. I got cross as the film went on, because especially as the jeopardy got higher and higher, because I started to know who those two skeletons were. And I thought, if it was me making the film, I wouldn't have shown that, because then I wouldn't have known. I'd have liked to not have known whether they died or whether they got away.
Right.
But because we'd been shown that, and it was lovely because they were together and they'd found each other, in fact, because they'd both been separated, hadn't they, by various things. Hunkered down together, and then it cuts to black. And then she doesn't go back to that skeleton scene, but we know that from the beginning. So.
And yet, at the same time, you could argue that the fact that she parked the inevitability of their demise, it framed watching their story in a very different way. I mean, I agree. I think it would have been an entirely different film if you didn't have that.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have that at the beginning, you'd have just thought they'd gone to sleep. You wouldn't know that they were necessarily caught. And I thought, in a weird way, by telling us, and I can't quite work out why this worked for me, but in telling us that they were found dead, or their bodies were found, you were left.
It gave their lives meaning.
It gave it kind of put their lives in parenthesis.
Yeah.
And it kind of gave you closure without having to go the obvious route of, oh, what happened to them? How did it happen to them? You know, 'cause you could argue, oh, was there a gun? Was there a dirt? What happened to these guys? I just thought it was, so that's interesting. I'd like to know what you guys think. What do you think? If you watch this, tell us, do you think she kind of, in a sense, gave us too much at the front, or was there a sort of much more, I think there was a more complex point to that?
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't belabor it at the beginning at all, and it was only sort of a dawning thing in my mind, because you really embrace the two characters, don't you? Anybody would. They're gorgeous characters.
I think for me what that served to do was it made me rethink the idea of when we come across, and archaeologists come across skeletons and things like that, it makes you think that what you find is just a skeleton. But actually, who would have thought that behind this just skeleton was all of that complexity,
exactly,
and all that hope and all that dreaming?
Yeah,
I just thought it was an incredibly rich film.
It was, and I thought towards the end, and getting very near the end, I thought this film is an absolute miracle of spare screenwriting. I mean, hardly anything in a way is said. No. There's a point where Lee's invited Cookie into his hut. And they don't say anything, and it's assumed that he's going to stay. And Lee goes out to chop some wood, and eventually Cookie gets a brush and starts to brush him, and eventually goes out and gets some flowers and puts them in a jar. And Lee comes in and says, "Place looks better already." And I thought, in that one statement conveys what a nice guy he is. The fact that they get on. She's brilliant at writing a script. If it was her that wrote it, and I presume it was.
I thought it was an incredibly subtle, clever, moving, emotional, informative, inspiring, and yet at the same time tragic story of how there is an American dream. There is this idea that anyone can achieve anything, and I do think American society is unusual in that you can actually, more often than not, come from no standing and achieve something. But I think this film was a reminder that that's a rarity, really.
Yeah.
The odds are stacked against you.
Yeah,
and for something that really, Toby Jones's character wouldn't have really missed too much.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
No.
Why not let these guys succeed in their business? It made me think of Ben and Jerry's and all those kind of names that we think of, and you think, God, it only takes a little bit of kind of innovation.
Yeah.
A little bit of illegality in there too.
Yeah. Except that Cookie would have gone down in history as by all those men that were there. Do you remember that guy that made those?
Those wonderful cakes.
Yeah. So in that
sense. So how would you sum up and score it?
It wasn't beautiful looking in the sense of showing off.
No, they weren't hugely compositionally show-offy.
No, but it was all green and blue. It was very blue, I thought, and I thought that was lovely.
I like the colour palette.
I did a lot, and the characters, as I say, were drop dead. You love them. You wanted to go and be their best friends. Toby was really good as the, not even as a Mr. Horrible, because he really liked his Clifford. He felt at one stage he'd probably have employed him as a cook.
If he hadn't stolen his milk.
Couldn't believe somebody would be stealing from his cow. But then, of course, he had to prove that he was the boss. And then all of that, I just think it's more or less. I had my issues with the skeletons at the beginning, but everything you've said about, it brought other things into being, and the fact that...
I think it made it timeless. I think it brought it out of just their story to a more general story of all the remains of American history and world history.
Yeah, exactly. And I would give it 95.7.
5.7. Okay. Yeah, I agree. I mean,
I'm only not giving it 100 because of my one reservation.
Right,
about
yeah.
that.
I thought it was excellent. I thought it, and as I say, I'm a huge believer in the fact that when the conditions in which you see a film or read a book have a huge impact on how you receive things. So you might see something one time, love it because you're in an excitable mood, and not see it the next, and not like it at all. This came at this was the right time, the right moment, and I was in a really low place, and I thought it was a beautifully executed film. You have to be patient with it. It's a bit like The Dig. It's a slow film.
Yes.
It's a slow burn.
Yeah.
But if you've got an afternoon and this is available to stream, or if you want to go for 2 hours in the cinema just to escape the madness of life generally, I'd say you couldn't do better than this, because it's a story everyone will relate to. Yeah. We all have ambitions.
Yeah.
And it's a film about ambition, and it's a film about bravery, and it's a film about how those who aren't in the right sort of class have to do that much more in order to get, you know, what the rich have got.
Yeah.
So I'd give it 99.
Yeah.
I think it was excellent.
I did
I thought
too.
it was absolutely excellent.
And the cow was like a huge member of the cast.
Huge member of the cast. Huge member of the cast.
Okay, Mark, that's your cow impression.
For more film and family fun, don't forget to click the subscribe button and make sure to click the bell to never miss an update.